What if the gods you were taught to admire were born from something far more violent, far more human, and far more disturbing than any myth ever dared to say out loud? The ancient Greeks did not create myths to entertain children. They created them to explain a world drenched in chaos, sacrifice, and darkness, and buried beneath the marble statues and epic poetry is a layer of mythology that most people never see, a version so dark, so primordial, that even the ancient Greeks themselves tried to hide it. Tonight, we go there. Greek mythology is one of the most studied, celebrated, and retold collections of stories in all of human history. We learn about Zeus throwing lightning bolts, about Athena born from her father's skull, about heroes slaying monsters. But here is what they don't teach you in school. Before Zeus, before Olympus, before even the Titans, there was something older, something that makes the gods look tame by comparison. The earliest layers of Greek mythology are not stories of triumph. They are stories of cosmic horror, ritual murder, and a universe held together not by order, but by violence. This is Mythic Origins. And today we are going back to the beginning. Not to the cleaned-up beginning you know, but to the real one. Stay with us, because nothing about this story is what you think it is. Before there were gods, before there was earth, sky, or sea, Greek cosmology begins with a single word. Chaos, but not chaos in the way we use the word today. In the ancient Greek worldview, chaos was not disorder, it was a void. A dark, formless, infinite emptiness from which everything else was born. From this void, four primordial forces simply emerged, not created. Not born. They existed because existence itself had no choice. Gaia, the earth. Tartarus, the abyss beneath the world. Eros is primal desire. And Erebus, eternal darkness. This was not a loving creation. There was no god who shaped the world with care. The Greek universe began with emptiness, giving birth to darkness. And from that darkness, everything else would eventually bleed. Scholars who study pre-Homeric mythology, the mythology that existed before Homer's famous epics, believe these primordial beings represent something far older than Greek civilization itself. They may reflect ancient Near Eastern creation myths, possibly even Mesopotamian traditions, that were absorbed and transformed by the early Greeks thousands of years ago. This is not confirmed history. This is the territory of theory and archaeology. But the parallels are striking enough that they cannot be ignored. What is clear, however, is this: the Greek universe did not begin with light. It began with darkness, and the gods that would eventually rule it were born through acts no children's book would ever dare to describe. Let us begin with the act that many consider the darkest foundation of all Greek myth. Uranus, the sky, was the first ruler of the cosmos. He was the son and husband of Gaia, the earth herself. And from the very beginning, he was a god defined by fear. Gaia gave birth to the Titans, the Cyclopes, and monstrous beings called the Hecatonchires, creatures with 100 hands. And Uranus, terrified of what he had fathered, pushed them back into Gaia's womb. He imprisoned them inside her own body, refusing to let them exist. Imagine that for a moment. Not exile, not imprisonment in a dungeon, inside the earth itself. The mother forced to carry her own children against her will, in eternal pain. Gaia, in agony, forged a great sickle from adamantine, the hardest substance in existence, and asked her children to act. Only one answered. Cronus, the youngest Titan, crept close to his father under the cover of night, and he castrated Uranus with the sickle. The severed parts of Uranus fell into the sea. From the foam that formed around them, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, was born. That is not a metaphor. That is the literal origin story. As recorded in Hesiod's Theogony, written around 700 BC, the goddess of love was born from an act of violence, from the severed flesh of a tyrant cast into an ocean. This is the foundation, and it only gets darker from here. Cronus took his father's throne. He ruled over the Titans as the king of the cosmos, but the moment he claimed power, a prophecy consumed him. One of his own children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father. So Cronus made a decision that has haunted mythology ever since. He swallowed his children whole. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. one by one. As they were born, Cronus took each child from his wife Rhea and swallowed them alive. Not killing them, they were gods, they could not die, but imprisoning them inside his own body. A living tomb. Rhea watched this happen 5 times. 5 children. Gone when Zeus was born, she could not endure it again. She wrapped a stone in cloth and handed it to Cronus. He swallowed it without question. And she hid Zeus on the island of Crete, where he was raised in secret. Here is where the story takes a turn that mythology often glosses over. When Zeus grew, he returned and forced Cronus to vomit up his siblings. They emerged from their father's body, not as infants but as fully formed gods, grown inside their father for years or decades or centuries, depending on which ancient source you consult. Think about what that means. The Olympian gods, Hades, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, Hestia, spent their formative existence imprisoned inside the body of a tyrant who was also their father. They emerged not into a world of peace, but directly into a war. The Titanomachy, the war between the Olympians and the Titans, lasted 10 years. The violence was so catastrophic that according to Hesiod, the sea boiled and the earth shook to its very roots. The gods we worship in marble were shaped by trauma before they were shaped by power. That is not a minor detail. That is the entire architecture of the Greek divine psyche. Now we come to the part that most retellings leave out entirely. For decades, scholars argued about whether ancient Greek ritual practice ever included human sacrifice. The myths hint at it constantly. Iphigenia offered to Artemis, Andromeda chained as tribute to a sea monster, the labyrinth and its yearly tribute of Athenian youth. For a long time, mainstream archaeology treated these as symbolic, metaphors, literary devices. Then came the excavations. In 2016, archaeologists working at the site of an ancient sanctuary near Mount Lykaion in Arcadia, one of the oldest cult sites in all of Greece, uncovered the remains of what appeared to be a human sacrifice. The bones were those of an adolescent male, arranged in a manner consistent with ritual practice, dating to around 3,000 years ago. This was not the first such find. Minoan civilization, which directly preceded and heavily influenced ancient Greek culture, left evidence of ritual sacrifice in multiple sites across Crete. At the site of Anemospilia, archaeologists discovered what they interpreted as a human sacrificial ritual frozen in time, interrupted by an earthquake. A young man bound positioned over an altar, the priest who had performed the act, killed by falling masonry before he could escape. These are not myths. These are archaeological discoveries, and they suggest something deeply uncomfortable. The stories the Greeks told about gods demanding blood were not entirely fictional. They may have been memories. Echoes of practices that the later, more sophisticated Greek civilization quietly folded into allegory. The myth of Tantalus, who killed his own son Pelops and served him to the gods as a feast, may not simply be a story about hubris. It may be a cultural memory of a time when such things were considered, even practiced, in the name of divine favor. This is a theory, supported by archaeological evidence, but not proven with absolute certainty. But it is a theory that serious scholars take seriously, and it reframes every Greek myth involving sacrifice in a new and far more disturbing light. If the origins of the gods are dark, the Greek conception of punishment is something else entirely. The underworld of Greek mythology is not a simple afterlife. It is a layered, complex dimension, with different fates for different souls. And at its very deepest point lies Tartarus. Tartarus is not just a place. In the oldest myths, Tartarus is a primordial being, one of the 4 entities that emerged from chaos at the beginning of all things. The abyss itself is alive. Hesiod described Tartarus as being so deep, below the earth, that an anvil dropped from the surface would fall for 9 days before reaching its floor. This is where the gods imprisoned the Titans after their defeat. But more chillingly, this is where certain humans were condemned to punishments that had no end. Sisyphus, who cheated death, forced to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down at the summit, forever. Tantalus, who offended the gods, standing in a pool of water beneath fruit trees, and every time he reached for food or drink, they receded just beyond his grasp. For eternity, Ixion bound to a spinning wheel of fire, rotating forever, What makes these myths extraordinary is not their violence, it is their precision. These are not random tortures. Each punishment is designed to mirror the exact crime committed, turned into an infinite, inescapable loop. The Greek gods were not merciful. They were architects of suffering. And the mythology reflects a worldview in which the universe itself had no interest in fairness, only in perfect, terrible symmetry. The ancient Greeks built some of the most beautiful temples the world has ever seen. They wrote poetry that still moves us thousands of years later. They gave us democracy, philosophy, the foundations of Western thought. And they worshipped gods born from castration, raised in swallowed darkness, fighting wars that boiled the sea. There is no contradiction in that. That is perhaps the most honest thing about them. They did not sanitize their darkness. They put it in the stories. They passed it to their children and their children's children, not to frighten, but to say, this is what we came from. This is what the universe is capable of. Remember it. We live in a world that likes its myths clean. We like heroes without shadows, gods without cruelty, and origins without blood. But the Greeks knew something we have tried very hard to forget. That civilization is not built on light. It is built on the decision, made again and again, generation after generation, to choose something other than darkness, even when darkness is all you started with. If you want more stories from humanity's forgotten past, subscribe to Mythic Origins. Every story we tell is one they tried to bury,